Javier had lived his entire life in a small village on the outskirts of Andalusia, where his family had farmed for generations. He had always been proud of his simple, hard-working life, but the recent years had been unkind. A relentless drought scorched his fields, leaving his crops withered and useless. His livestock, once a source of pride, dwindled as he struggled to feed them. Eventually, the debts piled higher than he could bear, and the bank repossessed his farm. With nothing but a worn-out bag slung over his shoulder and a few coins jingling in his pocket, Javier left his home at dawn. His heart ached as he walked away from the only place he had ever called home, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. His destination was the city, where he hoped to find work as a laborer. The road he traveled was long and winding, cutting through a desolate landscape. Dry, cracked earth spread out on either side, with only the occasional cluster of hardy shrubs breaking the monotony. The scorching sun beat down mercilessly, beads of sweat dripping from Javier's brow. He clutched the strap of his bag tightly, his fingers calloused from years of toil in the fields. As he walked, cars occasionally sped past him, kicking up clouds of dust. He could feel the sting of judgment in their hurried glances, as if his tattered clothes and weary gait made him invisible or unworthy of acknowledgement. Yet Javier didn't mind. He had grown used to being overlooked. It was late afternoon when he noticed something unusual up ahead. A figure lay crumpled by the side of the road, motionless except for a faint movement of the chest. Javier quickened his pace, his heart racing. As he drew closer, he could make out more details. The man was dressed in dark athletic wear, a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His leg was bent at an odd angle, and his hands clutched at his ankle. His labored breaths were the only sound in the oppressive silence of the countryside. Javier paused for a moment, scanning the road for signs of help. A sleek black SUV sped past without slowing, the driver's gaze fixed straight ahead. Javier frowned. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cautious but kind. "Are you okay?" The man groaned softly, lifting his head slightly. His face was partially obscured by his cap and sunglasses, but his pain was evident. "No, I think my ankle is broken," he said, his voice weak. Javier knelt beside him, setting his bag down. "How long have you been here?" "Hours," the man replied, wincing as he shifted. No one stopped. Javier looked down the empty road, anger flickering in his chest at the thought of so many passing by without helping. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "I'll help you." The injured man raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "Why would you? You don't even know me." Javier shrugged, pulling out his small bottle of water. "Because you need it. That's enough for me." The man stared at him for a moment before nodding, his features softening. "Thank you," he murmured. As Javier tore a strip from his own shirt to create a makeshift bandage, he thought about how strange life could be. He had set out that morning feeling utterly lost, but now, amidst the dust and the heat, he had found purpose in helping a stranger. Little did he know, the decision to stop and help would change his life forever. The man winced as Javier gently examined his injured ankle. It was swollen and bruised, and any slight movement caused him to groan in pain. "It's bad," Javier said, frowning. "I think it might be broken. You need to see a doctor." The injured man nodded weakly, his face etched with discomfort. "I can't walk," he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. Javier glanced around. The empty countryside stretched in every direction, with no sign of a town or hospital. A few cars continued to speed by, their drivers either oblivious to the situation or unwilling to get involved. Javier's gaze lingered on one sleek sedan as it zoomed past, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. He sighed, shaking his head. "Looks like we're on our own," he said, his tone resigned but determined. "Can't you call someone?" the man asked, pulling out a cracked smartphone from his pocket. He tried turning it on, but the screen remained stubbornly black. He cursed under his breath. "I don't have a phone," Javier admitted, glancing down at his empty hands. "I couldn't afford one." The injured man raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He seemed to size Javier up, noting his weathered clothes and tired eyes. "You don't have much, do you?" Javier shrugged, unbothered by the observation. "Not anymore," he said simply. The man looked at him for a moment, as if trying to figure him out. "And yet you're helping me," he said, more to himself than to Javier. Javier smiled faintly, brushing the dirt off his knees as he stood. "We're all just people." he replied. If I were in your place, I'd hope someone would do the same for me. Despite his pain, the man let out a quiet laugh. You're one of the rare ones. Javier slung the man's arm over his shoulder and helped him to his feet. The man groaned in discomfort, his weight sagging heavily against Javier. Sorry, he muttered through gritted teeth. Don't apologize, Javier said, adjusting his grip. Let's get you to a doctor. The two of them began to move slowly down the road, Javier supporting most of the man's weight. It was a painstaking process, each step a small victory against the odds. The injured man's breathing was labored, and sweat poured down his face, but he didn't complain. To distract him from the pain, Javier struck up a conversation. So what were you doing out here anyway? The man hesitated before answering. I was just out for a drive, he said vaguely. Javier raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Well, you picked a bad road for it. Nothing but dust and heat out here. The man let out a faint chuckle, though it quickly turned into a grimace as his injured leg shifted. Yeah, I noticed. They continued in silence for a while, the rhythmic crunch of their footsteps the only sound. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the road. Javier could feel his own exhaustion creeping in, but he pushed it aside. Here, he said, pausing to dig into his bag. He pulled out the last of his water and handed it to the man. You need this more than I do, the man protested weakly. Nonsense, Javier replied. You're hurt. Drink. Reluctantly, the man took a sip, his expression softening. You're too kind, he murmured. Javier shrugged again, his characteristic humility shining through. Kindness doesn't cost anything, he said. As they trudged onward, the man looked at Javier with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. He didn't know who this poor wanderer was, or why he was willing to go out of his way to help a complete stranger. But something about Javier's quiet strength and selflessness struck a chord deep within him. Though neither of them realized it at the time, this chance encounter was the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. As the dusty road gave way to cobblestone streets, the small village came alive with muted sounds of evening life. Women were sweeping porches, old men sat on benches chatting in low voices, and the smell of roasting corn wafted through the air. Javier and the injured man stumbled into the square, their presence drawing curious glances. A young boy who had been playing soccer nearby dashed off shouting, Ayuda! Ayuda! His cries echoed through the streets, summoning a small crowd of villagers who quickly surrounded them. What happened? An elderly woman asked, her voice filled with concern. He's hurt, Javier explained, shifting the man's weight slightly to keep him upright. He needs a doctor. Two men from the crowd stepped forward and gently eased the injured man onto a makeshift bench. Javier slumped down beside him, wiping sweat from his brow. His body ached, but relief washed over him as he realized they had finally made it to safety. A nurse emerged from a nearby clinic, alerted by the commotion. She was a kind-looking woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a calming demeanor. Bring him inside, she instructed, waving them toward the clinic. Javier and the other men helped the injured man inside, carefully placing him on an examination table. The nurse began inspecting his leg, her experienced hands probing the swollen area. The man winced, but remained silent, his jaw clenched against the pain. It's a bad sprain, possibly a fracture, the nurse said after a few moments. He'll need an x-ray, but for now I'll splint it to keep it stable. She worked quickly, wrapping the man's leg with professional precision. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek wallet. I'll pay for everything, he said firmly, handing over a credit card. The nurse took the card, her eyes glancing at the name printed on it. She froze, staring at the card for a long moment before her gaze snapped back to the man's face. Wait, are you Cristiano Ronaldo? She asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. The room fell silent. Javier, who had been leaning against the wall with his eyes half closed, suddenly straightened up. His brow furrowed as he looked at the man he had just carried for miles. Cristiano hesitated for a moment, then sighed and removed his cap and sunglasses. His face, unmistakable to any soccer fan, was revealed in full. Gasps filled the room, and the nurse took a step back, her hands flying to her mouth. You're him, the soccer star, one of the men exclaimed. Javier's jaw dropped. Wait, you're saying he's Ronaldo? The Ronaldo? Cristiano gave a sheepish nod, his face softening into a small smile. Yes, that's me, he said quietly. The realization hit Javier like a bolt of lightning. He stared at the man he had helped, trying to reconcile the global icon with the injured stranger he had found on the roadside. For a moment, he struggled to find words. I didn't recognize you. Javier finally managed, his voice filled with shock. Cristiano chuckled softly. Not many would, in my condition. And to be honest, it was a bit of a relief. You helped me not because of who I am, but because of who you are. The nurse, still wide-eyed, quickly composed herself. Well, Mr. Ronaldo, you're lucky this man found you, she said, nodding toward Javier. Without his help, who knows how long you would have been stranded. Cristiano turned to Javier, his expression serious. I owe you my life, he said earnestly. You didn't know who I was, yet you went out of your way to help me. That kind of kindness is rare. Javier rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly feeling self-conscious. I just did what anyone should do, he said quietly. Cristiano's lips curved into a warm smile. You'd be surprised how many wouldn't. You're a good man, Javier. The room remained silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Javier, still reeling from the revelation, couldn't help but marvel at how strange life could be. This morning he had been a penniless wanderer, and now he was sitting next to one of the most famous athletes in the world. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He had seen a man in need and done what was right. That, to Javier, was all that counted. The clinic buzzed with excitement as word of Cristiano Ronaldo's presence spread through the small village. Outside, a growing crowd gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the superstar. Javier sat quietly in a corner of the room, watching as the nurse finished splinting Cristiano's ankle. He still couldn't quite believe that the man he had carried for miles was one of the most famous athletes in the world. Cristiano glanced over at Javier, who looked lost in thought. You seem quiet, he said, his voice breaking the silence between them. Javier blinked, snapping out of his daze. It's just strange, he admitted. I didn't know who you were, and now... He gestured vaguely at the small crowd visible through the clinic's window. Cristiano smiled. Fame is a strange thing, he said. Sometimes it helps, but other times it's just a mask. Out there, people see Cristiano Ronaldo, the footballer. But you? You saw a man who needed help. Javier shrugged, still uncomfortable with the attention. I wasn't thinking about who you were. I just did what anyone should do. Cristiano's expression turned serious. But not everyone would, he said firmly. Do you know how many cars drove past me before you stopped? People who recognized me but didn't bother to help? Javier frowned, his chest tightening at the thought. That's not right, he said quietly. It's not, Cristiano agreed. But that's why what you did matters so much. The media circus. As the conversation unfolded, the nurse re-entered the room with a phone in hand. I called your team, Mr. Ronaldo, she said. They're sending someone to pick you up. Thank you, Cristiano said, nodding graciously. A short while later, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the clinic, followed by a convoy of media vans. Reporters spilled out, cameras flashing as they swarmed the entrance. The nurse frowned, muttering something about how fast the press always arrived in situations like this. Cristiano sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was hoping to avoid this, he said, glancing apologetically at Javier. Javier shifted uncomfortably in his chair, feeling out of place amidst the chaos. This isn't my world, he murmured. Cristiano smiled at him. Maybe not, but you're the reason I'm still here to face it. The door swung open, and a sharp-dressed man in a suit hurried inside. Cristiano! He exclaimed, relief flooding his face. We've been searching everywhere for you. I'm fine, Manuel, Cristiano assured him, motioning toward his splinted ankle. Thanks to this man. He gestured toward Javier, who stiffened under the attention. Manuel turned to Javier, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the farmer's worn clothes and tired face. You helped him? I just did what anyone would, Javier said, already growing tired of repeating himself. Cristiano's laugh was warm and genuine. You keep saying that, but you're wrong. Most wouldn't. That's why your kindness stands out. A public gesture. Cristiano stood, leaning heavily on a crutch provided by the nurse. He motioned for Javier to join him as they stepped outside. The crowd erupted into cheers, the flashing cameras momentarily blinding. Cristiano raised a hand, signaling for silence. The crowd hushed, eager to hear him speak. Today, I learned something important, Cristiano began, his voice steady and clear. Fame and wealth mean nothing if you lose sight of what really matters, human kindness. This man here, Javier. He paused, placing a hand on Javier's shoulder. Javier froze, overwhelmed by the attention. Javier didn't know who I was, Cristiano continued. He didn't care. He saw someone who needed help and gave everything he had to make sure I was safe. That's true heroism. The crowd erupted into applause, but Cristiano wasn't finished. We live in a world where too many people look the other way. Javier didn't. And because of that, I'm here today. He reminded me that the world still has good people. People who care. Javier's face turned red, and he looked down, feeling out of place amidst the cheers. Cristiano leaned closer, his voice low enough for only Javier to hear. I'm not letting this end here. You changed my life today. Now, I'm going to change yours. Javier looked up, startled, but Cristiano only smiled. The moment felt surreal, as though he were caught in a dream. But as the cameras continued to flash, he realized this was no dream. It was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The next morning, Javier awoke in a modest room within the village clinic. The events of the previous day felt like a hazy dream, but the ache in his muscles and the distant murmurs of a crowd outside reminded him it was all real. He sat up slowly, his mind replaying Cristiano Ronaldo's promise. I'm going to change your life. Javier wasn't sure what to make of it. He had lived his entire life as a farmer, far removed from fame, wealth, or even basic comfort. Could someone like Cristiano Ronaldo truly help a man like him? The door creaked open and Cristiano entered, supported by a crutch. Despite the injury, he radiated energy and purpose. Good morning, Javier, he greeted warmly. Morning, Javier replied, still uncertain how to act around the global icon. How's your leg? Better, thanks to you, Cristiano said, taking a seat across from him. He placed a folder on the small table between them and leaned forward. I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. About you. Javier raised an eyebrow, unsure where this was going. You're a rare person, Javier, Cristiano began, his tone serious. You have nothing, yet you gave everything to help me. I've met countless people in my life, but few with your kind of heart. That's why I want to help you. Javier frowned, his modesty making him uncomfortable. You don't owe me anything. I didn't help you for a reward. Cristiano smiled knowingly. I know. That's exactly why I'm doing this. He opened the folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a document stamped with an official seal. This, Cristiano said, pointing to the paper, is the deed to a piece of land just outside this village. Fertile, with access to irrigation. It's yours now. Javier stared at the document, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process the words. What? He finally managed. I've already arranged everything, Cristiano explained. You'll have a fresh start, a chance to rebuild your life, and there's more. He gestured to a second folder. This one contains a business plan. I've connected with some agricultural experts who will help you get started. Whatever you need, seeds, tools, livestock, it's all covered. You won't just survive, Javier. You'll thrive. Javier's hands trembled as he reached for the papers. The weight of what Cristiano was offering was almost too much to bear. Why would you do this for me? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Cristiano leaned back, his expression softening. Because you reminded me of something important. It's not about what we have, it's about what we give. You gave me hope when I needed it most. Now it's my turn to give that back to you. Later that day, Cristiano called a press conference in the village square. The media, still buzzing from the previous day's events, gathered eagerly. Javier stood awkwardly at the edge of the stage, feeling out of place in his worn clothes amidst the polished cameras and microphones. Cristiano stepped forward, his crutch tucked under one arm. Yesterday, I met a man who reminded me of the power of kindness, he began. Javier here didn't care about my fame or fortune. He only cared that I was a person in need. That selflessness inspired me more than I can put into words. The crowd listened intently as Cristiano continued. Today, I want to honor him, not with words, but with action. I've ensured that Javier has the resources he needs to start a new life, one where his hard work and generosity can flourish. Javier's face turned red as the crowd erupted into applause. Cristiano motioned for him to step forward, and with great reluctance, he did. Cristiano placed a hand on his shoulder. Javier, you've given me more than you realize. This is just the beginning of what you deserve. Javier looked out at the crowd, overwhelmed by the attention. But as he met their gazes, he saw admiration and respect in their eyes. For the first time in years, he felt like more than a poor wanderer. He felt seen. Over the next few days, as arrangements for the land and business were finalized, Javier and Cristiano grew closer. Despite their vastly different lives, they discovered a shared appreciation for hard work and humility. Cristiano visited the land with Javier, offering encouragement and listening as Javier shared his dreams for the farm. "It's not just about me," Javier explained. "I want to give back to the village, create jobs, and make sure no one goes hungry." Cristiano smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say that. That's why I believe in you." As the two men stood together, looking out over the fertile fields that would soon become a thriving farm, they knew their lives had changed forever. One had gained perspective, the other had gained hope, and both had found an unlikely friend. What began as a chance encounter on a dusty road had blossomed into a story of kindness, resilience, and the power of human connection.